Do you want to sleep? Then listen to me. Turn off the lights, close the windows, now close them and listen to you. Finally, I will make a request to you. Put down your phone and listen to my voice. Listen clearly. I will now tell you a story that will make you sleepy. Close your eyes and listen carefully to my words.
Good evening. Tonight, I want to take you far from Rome, far from the marble forums and crowded streets of the Republic, and into a land of mountains, horses, and restless ambition. This is the story of Alexander the Great, but before he became a conqueror whose name would echo across continents, he was simply a boy growing up in the hard, unpredictable kingdom of Macedon. Our story begins in the middle of the 4th century before the Common Era, in a world where Greece was powerful in culture, but weak in unity. City-states argued, fought, allied, and betrayed one another in endless cycles. Athens had philosophers and poets. Sparta had discipline and fear. But to the north lay Macedon, a kingdom many Greeks looked down upon as half-civilized, ruled not by debate, but by kings and swords. Macedon was not polished, but it was dangerous. Its people valued strength, loyalty, and skill in war. Kings did not rule by tradition alone. They ruled because they could command men in battle. And in 356 BCE, in the capital city of Pella, a child was born into this harsh world, a child who would one day erase the old balance of power entirely. His name was Alexander. Alexander's father was King Philip II of Macedon, one of the most formidable political minds of the ancient world. Philip was not merely a warrior, he was a reformer, a strategist, and a master manipulator. He reshaped the Macedonian army, introducing the long sarissa spear and training his soldiers to fight as a single, disciplined machine. While Greek city-states argued in assemblies, Philip was building an army that could crush them all. Alexander's mother, Olympias, was a very different force. She came from Epirus, a land steeped in ancient rituals and fierce traditions. Olympias believed deeply in destiny, omens, and divine favor. She encouraged stories that Alexander was not merely Philip's son, but the child of Zeus himself, conceived through divine intervention. Whether she truly believed this, or simply understood the power of such a myth, hardly mattered. Alexander grew up hearing again and again that he was meant for greatness, not as a hope, but as a certainty. From an early age, Alexander lived between two worlds. From his father, he learned discipline, command, and the brutal realities of power. From his mother, he absorbed a sense of fate and exceptionality. He was not being raised to be a king someday. He was being raised to believe he could not be ordinary. One of the most famous moments of his childhood captures this perfectly. When Alexander was still a boy, a powerful horse was brought before King Philip. The animal was magnificent, but savage. It threw every rider who tried to mount it. Philip, frustrated, prepared to send the horse away as useless. Alexander, watching closely, spoke up. He noticed something the grown men had missed. The horse was afraid of its own shadow. Alexander approached calmly, turned the animal toward the sun so it could no longer see the darkness on the ground, and mounted it. The horse submitted. Philip, stunned, is said to have told his son, "Macedon is too small for you. Seek a kingdom worthy of your ambition." The horse was named Bucephalus, and he would carry Alexander across much of the known world. But courage alone does not make a conqueror. Philip understood that if his son was to rule more than a battlefield, he would need a mind as sharp as his sword. So he hired the greatest teacher alive at the time, Aristotle. For several years, Aristotle educated Alexander and a group of noble youths in philosophy, science, politics, medicine, and literature. Alexander fell in love with Homer's Iliad, seeing Achilles as a model of heroic glory. He did not read these stories as legends of the past, he read them as instructions. Even as a teenager, Alexander showed signs of impatience. While Philip fought wars and negotiated alliances, Alexander longed for action. At just 16 years old, he was left in charge of Macedon while his father campaigned elsewhere. When a local rebellion broke out, Alexander crushed it without hesitation and founded a city in his own name. It was not the last time he would do so. By the time Alexander reached his late teens, he was already a seasoned commander, admired by soldiers and watched very carefully by rivals. He had seen how power was taken, how loyalty was earned, and how fear could be used as a tool. But he had also learned something more dangerous, that the world could be remade by someone bold enough to try. What he did not yet know was how suddenly that opportunity would come. Because while Philip was preparing to lead all of Greece against the Persian Empire, fate intervened. At a wedding celebration meant to secure Macedon's future, Philip II was assassinated, cut down in public by one of his own guards. In a single moment, the most powerful man in Greece was gone, and the throne passed to a 20-year-old king, surrounded by enemies, doubters, and men who believed he would fail. They were about to learn how wrong they were.
When Philip II died, the world did not pause to mourn him. Kings rarely receive the luxury of grief. Power, once unguarded, invites challenge, and Alexander, barely 20 years old, inherited not only a throne, but a kingdom balanced on the edge of collapse. The news of Philip's assassination raced outward from Macedon. In Greece, old resentments stirred. In the north, tribal leaders sharpened their weapons. In Persia, officials smiled quietly. The great architect of Macedonian power was gone, and surely his son, young, untested, emotional, would not hold what his father had built. They were wrong. Philip moved first, and he moved fast. Before rivals could gather armies or speeches, Alexander secured his position at home. Potential claimants to the throne were eliminated swiftly and without apology. Some were imprisoned, others were executed. It was a harsh beginning, but in Macedon, uncertainty was more dangerous than bloodshed. Alexander understood that mercy, offered too early, could destroy him. Once his authority inside Macedon was beyond question, he turned outward. South of Macedon, the Greek city-states have long resented Philip's dominance. Many had submitted not out of loyalty, but fear. Now that fear was fading. Athens buzzed with talk of independence. Thebes, proud and militaristic, began to test the limits of Macedonian control. Alexander responded not with negotiation, but with presence. He marched south at remarkable speed, appearing in Greece before many cities had finished debating rebellion. His arrival alone was a message. The son of Philip was not hiding in Pella, he was at the head of an army. At Corinth, the leaders of Greece met him. There, Alexander was confirmed as hegemon, supreme commander of the Greek forces, just as his father had been. Publicly, unity was preserved. Privately, resentment simmered. Then word reached Greece that Alexander had marched north again, into the wild lands beyond Macedon. Tribes in Thrace and Illyria had risen, believing the young king distracted and vulnerable. Alexander met them in the mountains. These were not the formal battles of Greek warfare. These were ambushes, narrow passes, and sudden violence. Alexander fought alongside his men, sharing their dangers. He crossed rivers under fire, scaled cliffs, and drove his enemies back with relentless pressure. By the time he returned south, the northern frontier was secure, and his reputation had grown. But while Alexander was away, Greece made its move. A rumor spread that the young king had been killed in battle. In Thebes, the news was seized upon with desperate hope. The city expelled its Macedonian garrison and declared revolt. Athens hesitated, watching closely. Other cities waited to see who would prevail. Alexander did not send envoys. He marched. In less than 2 weeks, his army was at the gates of Thebes. The speed of his response stunned the Greek world. Many still believed him dead when his banners appeared on the horizon. Alexander offered Thebes a chance to surrender. They refused. What followed was not a battle, it was a lesson. The Macedonian army stormed the city. Street by street, Thebes fell. When it was over, the city that had once stood as a rival to Athens lay in ruins. Thousands were killed. Tens of thousands were sold into slavery. The city itself was dismantled stone by stone, spared only its temples and the house of the poet Pindar. The message was unmistakable. Rebellion would not be debated. It would be erased. Athens, watching in horror, quickly submitted. So did the rest of Greece. No further revolts followed. Alexander had done what even his father had not fully achieved. He had broken the will to resist. To later generations, the destruction of Thebes would seem cruel, even monstrous, but in the brutal logic of ancient power, it was calculated. One city suffered so that many others would not have to. With Greece silent and his rear secured, Alexander turned his gaze eastward. Across the Aegean Sea lay the Persian Empire, the greatest power the world had ever known. It stretched from Asia Minor to the edges of India, rich beyond imagination, ruled by King Darius III. For generations, Persia had loomed as both rival and threat to the Greek world. Philip had planned to invade it. Alexander intended to finish what his father had begun and surpass it. In the spring of 334 BCE, Alexander stood on the shores of the Hellespont, the narrow sea separating Europe from Asia. Before crossing, he performed a symbolic act. He threw a spear into Asian soil and declared the land won by the spear. It was a ritual gesture, but also a promise.
With approximately 40,000 men, Macedonians and Greeks together, Alexander crossed into Asia. Behind him lay a secured homeland. Ahead of him lay an empire that believed him insignificant. They would not believe that for long. The first great test came at the river Granicus. Persian forces waited on the far bank, confident that the river would break the Macedonian charge. Alexander did not hesitate. He led the assault himself, riding into the river under a storm of missiles. The fighting was savage and chaotic, but the Macedonian discipline held. Persian commanders fell. The river ran red. Asia Minor began to fall. Cities opened their gates. Garrisons surrendered. Greek cities under Persian control welcomed Alexander as a liberator. His reputation grew with each victory, not just as a general, but as something more. A man who did not wait, a man who did not retreat, a man who seemed to believe that the world itself could be forced to yield. And the Persian king, Darius III, was finally paying attention. The two rulers were now on a collision course. One was master of the largest empire on earth. The other was a young king who had destroyed a city to make a point. Their meeting would decide the fate of continents. Across the vast reaches of the Persian Empire, the news finally settled in. This was no border skirmish. This was no temporary disturbance led by an ambitious youth. Alexander of Macedon was tearing through Asia Minor with speed, discipline, and a kind of confidence that unsettled even experienced commanders. Satraps, Persian provincial governors, fell back or were defeated in detail. Greek cities long under Persian authority welcomed the invader as a liberator. Supply lines collapsed, garrisons surrendered, and at the heart of the empire, the great king could no longer ignore him.
Darius III was not an incompetent ruler, as later propaganda would suggest. He had risen to the throne in a court thick with intrigue and murder, and he understood that authority depended on visible strength. The Persian Empire had crushed rebellions before. It had swallowed kingdoms whole. One Macedonian army, no matter how bold, would not be allowed to roam unchecked. Darius began to gather forces from across his domains. From Mesopotamia, cavalry arrived. From Media and Bactria, seasoned warriors. From the Far East, troops who had marched for months to answer the king's call. This was an army vast beyond anything Alexander had yet faced. Meanwhile, Alexander did not rush blindly forward. He secured the coastline, denying the Persian navy friendly ports. He advanced deliberately, cutting Persian power off from the sea. Every city taken was another knot untied from the empire's western edge. The two forces finally approached one another near the town of Issus in 333 BCE. The geography mattered. Between mountains and sea lay a narrow strip of land. Darius, with his enormous numbers, could not deploy them fully. Alexander, with fewer men but superior training and cohesion, saw the opportunity immediately. This would not be a battle of size. It would be a battle of nerve. Darius took the field in person, standing in a chariot surrounded by his royal guard. His presence was meant to steady his troops and terrify the enemy. Persian kings did not hide. They were seen, elevated, unmistakable. Alexander arranged his army with care. He placed his infantry, the famed Macedonian phalanx, at the center, bristling with long spears. Cavalry guarded the flanks, and on the right, where the decisive blow would fall, Alexander positioned himself with his companion cavalry. When the fighting began, it was brutal and immediate. The Persian center pressed hard. The Macedonian line bent but did not break. Then Alexander struck. He drove his cavalry forward in a wedge formation, punching through the Persian line toward the place where Darius stood. Dust, screams, and steel filled the air. For a moment, it seemed as though the entire battle narrowed to a single point, king facing king. Darius saw the danger, and he fled. Whether out of panic or calculation, the great king turned his chariot and left the field. The effect was catastrophic. Persian morale collapsed. Soldiers who moments before had fought bravely now ran. What had been a battle became a rout. Issus was Alexander's first direct confrontation with the King of Kings, and he had won. The spoils were extraordinary. Darius's camp fell into Macedonian hands, along with his mother, wife, and children. Alexander treated them with respect, assuring them they would be honored as royalty. It was a deliberate act. He wanted to show that he was not a barbarian conqueror, but a rightful successor to Persian authority. Darius, shaken but not defeated, sent envoys. He offered a ransom for his family. He offered land west of the Euphrates. He offered friendship and alliance. Many Macedonian officers urged Alexander to accept. He would be richer than any king in Greece. He would rule vast territories. He could return home in triumph. Alexander refused. He did not come for half an empire. He came for it all. Instead of chasing Darius east immediately, Alexander turned south. It was a calculated move. The Persian navy still controlled much of the Mediterranean. To defeat it, Alexander would take away its ports. City after city fell. Most surrendered. One did not. Tyre was a wealthy island city, heavily fortified and fiercely independent. It refused Alexander entry. From its walls, its defenders believed the sea itself protected them. Alexander answered with one of the astonishing engineering feats of the ancient world. He ordered a causeway built from the mainland to the island, stone by stone, under constant attack. The Tyrians hurled missiles, launched fire ships, and mocked the effort. Months passed. The siege dragged on. Alexander did not abandon it. When Tyre finally fell after 7 months, the punishment was severe. Thousands were killed or enslaved. The city was broken. Again, the message was clear. Resistance would be remembered. From Tyre, Alexander marched south into Egypt. There, something unexpected happened. The Egyptians did not resist. To them, Alexander was not a foreign conqueror, but a deliverer from Persian rule. He was crowned pharaoh and welcomed into ancient temples. In the desert, he traveled to the Oracle of Siwa, where priests declared him the son of a god. Alexander did not deny it. On the Mediterranean coast, he founded a city, Alexandria. It would become one of the greatest centers of learning and trade the world had ever known. But the heart of the war still lay ahead. Darius was gathering another army, larger than the first, determined to end the threat once and for all. He chose open ground near a place called Gaugamela, flat terrain where his numbers and chariots could finally be used to full effect. Alexander marched to meet him. One army represented tradition, wealth, and scale. The other represented speed, discipline, and a single, focused will. The outcome would decide who ruled the world. And this time, there would be no retreat. The plain of Gaugamela stretched wide and flat beneath an open sky. It was exactly the ground Darius III had wanted. Here, in the heart of Mesopotamia, the Persian king had prepared carefully. The land had been leveled to allow his scythed chariots full freedom of movement. His army, drawn from every corner of the empire, stood in massive ranks: infantry, cavalry, archers, mercenaries, and elite guards. Numbers alone made the sight overwhelming. This was the final stand of the Persian Empire. Alexander approached with a force far smaller, perhaps 47,000 men, against an enemy several times that number. His officers could see the imbalance clearly. Parmenion, his most experienced general, urged caution. Some suggested fighting at night, relying on surprise. Alexander refused. "I will not steal my victory," he said. He wanted the battle decided in the open, where no one could question the outcome. Before dawn, on October 1st, 331 BCE, Alexander addressed his troops. He spoke not of fear, but of honor, of everything they had already achieved together. These men had crossed seas, deserts, and mountains. They had defeated the greatest power in the world once already. They could do it again. When the sun rose, the two armies advanced. Darius stood at the center of the Persian line in his royal chariot, surrounded by his immortals and guarded by cavalry. He commanded size, wealth, and tradition. Alexander, riding Bucephalus, took his place on the right flank, where he always fought. He wore a plumed helmet and carried himself like a man who expected destiny to bend. As the armies drew closer, Alexander began a strange maneuver. Instead of charging straight ahead, he angled his army slowly to the right. The Persians mirrored the movement, afraid he meant to outflank them. In doing so, they stretched their own line, creating gaps. This was exactly what Alexander wanted. Darius unleashed his chariots. They thundered forward, blades flashing, meant to tear through Macedonian formations. But Alexander had prepared for this. His men opened lanes. Javelins flew, horses fell. The terrifying machines lost momentum and were neutralized. Then Alexander struck. At the moment the Persian line thinned, he formed his cavalry into a wedge and drove straight toward the center, toward Darius himself. The charge was fast, violent, and focused. The Macedonian infantry pressed forward at the same time, locking the enemy in place. For a brief, terrible moment, the fate of the world hung on a narrow strip of ground. Darius saw the wedge coming. Once again, he hesitated. Once again, he turned and fled. The sight of the great king abandoning the field shattered Persian resistance. Units collapsed, commanders lost control. What had been a carefully prepared defense dissolved into chaos. The Persian Empire did not fall in a single day, but at Gaugamela, it stopped fighting as a unified force. Alexander wanted to pursue Darius immediately, but word reached him that the Macedonian left flank was under severe pressure. Parmenion was struggling. Alexander made a critical decision. He broke off the pursuit to secure his army. Victory, not personal glory, mattered most. When night fell, the battlefield belonged to Macedon. The road to the heart of Persia lay open. In the weeks that followed, Alexander entered Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, cities of unimaginable wealth. Treasuries were opened, gold and silver flowed. Palaces that symbolized centuries of Persian rule now stood under Macedonian guard. At Persepolis, something happened that would haunt Alexander's legacy. During a drunken celebration, a fire was set in the royal palace. Whether it was a deliberate act of revenge for Persian invasions of Greece or a moment of reckless excess, the flames consumed one of the greatest symbols of the old empire. Alexander later regretted it, but the message had already been sent. The old world was ending. Darius fled east, trying to raise another army, but his authority was gone. Satraps defected, allies turned away. Eventually, he was betrayed by his own men and murdered. Alexander found his body and ordered royal funerary honors. He was no longer merely a conqueror. He was now king of Asia. Yet victory brought new challenges. Alexander began to adopt Persian customs. He wore elements of Persian dress. He kept Persian officials in power. He spoke of unity between Macedonians and Persians. Some of his companions grew uneasy. They had followed him to defeat an empire, not to become part of one they barely understood. The man who had destroyed Persia now sought to rule it, and that would prove more difficult than conquest, because Alexander was not finished. Beyond Persia lay lands no Greek had ever ruled: Central Asia, India, and the edge of the known world. The question was no longer whether Alexander could defeat his enemies. It was whether his army and his own mind could survive the ambition that had brought him this far.
By the time Alexander stood in the palaces of Persia, surrounded by treasures that could buy kingdoms, many believed the story was complete. He had crossed from Europe into Asia. He had shattered the Persian Empire. He had avenged old Greek defeats and claimed the title, King of Kings. By any reasonable measure, this was the end. Alexander did not agree. To him, conquest was not a destination. It was a momentum. Stopping felt like failure. Somewhere beyond the eastern horizon lay lands no Macedonian had ruled, rivers unnamed in Greek, people spoken of only in rumor. And Alexander believed deeply that the limits of the world were meant to be tested. So he turned east. The march into Central Asia was not like the great set-piece battles of earlier campaigns. There were no vast armies meeting on open plains. Instead, Alexander faced endless distances, hostile terrain, and enemies who refused to fight him directly. In Bactria and Sogdiana, local leaders waged guerrilla war. They struck supply lines, vanished into mountains, and refused decisive battle. Alexander responded with relentless pursuit. He built fortresses, settled veterans, and hunted resistance leaders across deserts and frozen passes. It was here that his character began to change. The Alexander of early victories had been charismatic, reckless, generous. Now he grew harsher, more suspicious. Rebellions were met with mass punishments. Loyalty was demanded, not requested. And tragedy followed. At a drunken banquet, Alexander quarreled with Cletus the Black, one of his oldest companions, the man who had saved his life at the Granicus. Words turned bitter. Cletus accused Alexander of forgetting his Macedonian roots, of adopting Persian arrogance. Alexander, drunk and furious, seized a spear and killed him. The room fell silent. When the anger faded, Alexander collapsed in grief. He locked himself away, refusing food, calling himself a murderer. But the damage was done. The line between king and companion had been crossed. Fear had entered relationships once built on trust. Still, the march continued. Alexander pushed into India in 326 BCE, crossing the Hindu Kush and descending into lands richer and stranger than anything he had yet seen. Here, he faced King Porus at the Hydaspes River. Porus commanded war elephants, towering beasts armored and terrifying. Many of Alexander's men had never seen such creatures. The battle was brutal. Alexander used deception, crossing the river under cover of storm and darkness. When the armies met, the elephants caused chaos, trampling friend and foe alike. But discipline and adaptability won the day. Porus was defeated. When Alexander asked how he wished to be treated, Porus replied, "Like a king." Alexander smiled and granted it. He restored Porus to his throne and even expanded his territory. It was a glimpse of the ruler Alexander wanted to be, conqueror and king, feared and respected. But India marked the breaking point. Beyond the Hydaspes lay the Ganges and, according to reports, kingdoms with armies larger than anything they had yet faced. The Macedonian soldiers, exhausted by years of marching, fighting, and heat, refused to go further. For the first time, Alexander was told no. He argued. He pleaded. He invoked glory and destiny. The men stood firm. After days of standoff, Alexander withdrew to his tent. When he emerged, he announced the decision to turn back. Outwardly, he accepted it. Inwardly, he never truly forgave it. The return was worse than the advance. Instead of retracing their steps, Alexander led part of his army through the Gedrosian Desert, one of the most brutal landscapes on Earth. Heat, thirst, and starvation killed thousands. Alexander shared their suffering, refusing water when his men had none. But leadership could not erase the cost of his choice. By the time he reached Babylon, Alexander was still young, just 32 years old, but worn by war, loss, and ambition. He spoke of new plans. Arabia would be next. The Western Mediterranean after that, perhaps even lands beyond the known world. But his body was failing. In 323 BCE, after a night of drinking, Alexander fell ill. Fever followed. Days passed. He grew weaker. His officers gathered, asking to whom the empire should be left. Alexander's answer was simple and disastrous: to the strongest. He died shortly afterward. The greatest empire ever built by a single man shattered almost immediately. His generals, his friends turned on one another. The world Alexander had conquered could not be held together by memory alone. Yet his legacy endured. Cities bore his name. Cultures blended. Greek language and ideas spread across continents. Even Rome, centuries later, would measure greatness against him. Alexander had chased the edge of the world, and in doing so, he changed it forever.